If a minority dictator, faction, or military makes an illegal or unconstitutional or both power grab within a country, this is a coup d'etat. Typically, this is by removal of an existing government. That's not the only combination. Very rarely, it's an anti-secession coup d'etat. And this is something I'm not making up from nothing. It's just that it's rather unusual for someone in power to be interested in doing a coup d'etat, they're usually a dictator, to have been an elected official that would have to be physically removed from power by refusing to pay attention to a vote. It's extremely unusual because a country that would tolerate a coup d'etat wouldn't have a person elected legitimately. And this has actually happened a couple of times when the vote really does show that the military strongman or woman doesn't really hold power and simply refuses to leave office. This is very rare because I don't know if anybody remembers the French Revolution, but refusing the will of the people equals death by treason. Typically, it's a removal of the existing government, rarely an anti-secession coup, which is the only definition I could find for what's going on in the United States. This is sort of a inverse coup d'etat. You refuse to leave office and create a dictatorship by refusing to step down after you've been voted out. There are a couple of examples. Most of these are during an actual coup d'etat against an existing or sitting president that is then made to fail, not because it was a coup d'etat, but because the coup d'etat caused the current incumbent leader to declare martial law and take power without consent of a majority of the population that voted. Usually it's not the majority of the population that was against them, just of the voting population, which is usually much smaller than the total. So they can legitimately say, only a small number of people want me to leave, the rest I'm sure want me here. The silent majority meme. This is not one of those cases in the United States when you get a little over half the population in the United States participating in a vote and over half of them voting against the incumbent, and also the states voting against the incumbent, and the Electoral College voting against the incumbent, and it becomes a naked power grab instead. The only example I can find that's even close, and it's way too close, Thailand. Prime Minister Shinawatra refused to leave office after a court order removal of herself and most of her cronies within the constitutional rules due to abuse of power and a transfer of her national security head, doing it in such a way that it would benefit the party or her in-group, nepotism or whatever. The rule of the constitutional court in that country, constitutional court, was that she was to be removed. There was a vote ahead. She was extremely unpopular at the time. There was a very high likelihood of her being removed from power. And instead of resigning before the election, she wanted to wait till the election. But she was ordered out because of the direct equivalent to being impeached successfully. She wouldn't leave. Now, that's the only example I can find because, again, in a democratic society, someone doesn't ignore order of secession. Some countries have an order of secession where you appoint the next person, or it's done by the party that's in power, or whatever, or sometimes it's hereditary. But in democratic societies, we the people decide who is our figurehead, not really a leader. And in the case of Trump, I wouldn't call him a leader, a mob leader possibly. Factors associated with coup attempts, not necessarily successes. Collusion with a foreign military power or government. A military that has become one-sided politically, culturally, or socially. An inexperienced leader. A question of the regime's legitimacy. Ignoring the rules of secession for peaceful transfer from one leader to another, or from one party to another, or through multiple parties, or a lack of any rules like that. The United States doesn't lack these rules, so it would be ignoring them. Any attempt to build an army based on ethnicity or ideology, even if it's an unofficial one. Domestic crisis, either political or economic or other. The tendency towards leading towards propaganda, aka fake news, aka conspiracy theories. Exclusion of individuals from institutions if they are not part of your in-group. Social inequity or class inequity or financial inequity. Or, and this is, I'm listing this last, any election, vote, or common understanding showing the incumbent autocrat lacks electoral strength. Plain English, if they've been voted out. Or it's become obvious that no one wants them in power. Off with their heads. Can induce a coup d'etat in either direction. So, of course, both sides get to yell coup d'etat at the other under those conditions. The reason coup d'etats happen is because two diametrically opposed groups can yell almost the same accusations. Collusion with a foreign military power accusation comes back as saying the Democrats did it with Ukraine, avoiding for some reason talking about the Russians. And it was a finding of fact that the Russians did interfere in the 2016 election, and that the Trump campaign and many Republicans who do not want to be brought into this also welcomed it because they gained something from it. But there's payback, and payback is bad. Owing your presidency to a foreign power, especially one that doesn't have our best interest in mind, is not political suicide, it's national suicide. What's the statistics on these? Well, Cold War coups, 50% of them are autocratic. The other 50% could go any way you want. It's not just democracy versus autocratic. After the Cold War, 40% became democratic outcomes. When there's not a Cold War, when you have two manipulating governments, you're going to end up having a coup d'etat that causes a democracy. And someone's going to really need to scream really quickly, but it has to be a republic, because I need to say that in the comment section. Almost all of them had the effect of ending any current civil war and or preventing one that was starting. I want you to think about that. Protests that almost always spur a coup d'etat, usually include counter-protesting, aka against each other. Divided against yourself we fall. This always helps the elites within the state apparatus to coordinate a coup d'etat, currently within the state apparatus. So people will scream deep state and drain the swamp. And others say, yeah, a stack of cronies preventing it. One of the cronies that Donald Trump put in place is going out of her way to refuse to acknowledge, and she's a head of a civil service of some sort, to acknowledge that the vote even happened. So that's a little Twilight Zone-ish right there, okay? After a coup d'etat, where it's induced by protests, they then engage in higher levels of protest or repression on both sides, which means the Boogaloo Boys get arrested or shot, along with BLM and Antifa, and because an autocratic government that succeeds after 7 days, that's how history records it. 7 days of an autocratic government being able to stay in place when they've been removed, when they're not supposed to be there. They will then immediately, within the first year, go to great lengths to destroy any protest group. It doesn't matter if they're on their sides or not. Every coup d'etat results in the group of people that revolutionarily put them in place being hunted down and murdered. Because it's, by definition, an illegal, unconstitutional regime. It has no reason to worry about anything other than being punished later. But only the liberals do that, right? That's right. Most coups end in a prevention or an ending of any civil war. But they rely on a division bordering on one every time. Or, if it's a military that decides to overrule the government, they do it through violent means and just start making a war against their own people. Many of these anti-constitutional coup d'etats are right-wing, virtually all of them actually, because autocratic behavior is, by definition, normally right-wing, not left-wing, but not always. It's about 60%. It's a division of sorts. Did I mention any attempt what are the things again that cause these to happen? Collusion with a foreign military or power. A one-sided military, politically, ideologically, culturally, or socially. An inexperienced leader. A question of regime legitimacy. Ignoring succession rules in the United States, for instance. An attempt to build an army based on ethnicity, ideology, political, whatever. Not making it diverse. Heavy reliance on propaganda. Exclusion of people outside of the group from the institutions that would give them power. A division of power forces people to cooperate. If you can make things one-sided, you can just refuse to give up power. Any domestic crisis, doesn't matter what kind, honestly, but usually it's political or economic. It's about 50-50. Usually they're combined. Any inequity in the classes that gets pronounced suddenly. Any voting or anything else like it that shows that the incumbent autocrat has electoral weakness causes a coup d'etat from the outside, or triggers one by the autocrat. Rarely, but it does happen. Finding out you're going to be removed from power and being required to pay your fucking taxes off might drive a person to this point. "50% of Cold War coup d'etats ended autocratic. After the Cold War, 40% became democratic, and depending on the decade, most were democratic. The rest are a mixed bag, with no one group being more likely. And a lot of the countries created pluralisms. Historians say that if you can make it last over a week, they consider it successful even if it's abolished afterwards. 50%, a little over, recorded as successful. A little under, recorded as successful, a little over, half, unsuccessful. Oddly enough, the percentages that are listed, 50.3% recorded versus the 49.7%. That actually matches the current popular vote in the United States, Biden versus Trump. I thought that was kind of funny. Some of it, we call that predictive programming and make an assumption. 36% happened in Africa, most worked. 31% in the Americas, most failed, because of our influence stopping them. Democracy stops them. Asia, 13% happened and worked. Middle East, most failed. Europe has so few of them we don't even list them most of the time. Again, after the coup d'etat, no matter which way it goes, both groups that were successful in influencing things are suppressed or murdered. Do you really want a coup d'etat this year?